Good afternoon and welcome to the first ADWEEK webinar of 2022. Nice to kick them all off, and we'll be looking at why location is the key to understanding customer intent. And it's all about, again here, understanding foot traffic patterns and what that ultimately can mean to you as you move forward and really trying to gauge intent for your customers. And our webinar today is being sponsored by Demandlocal. I'm Stuart File, Vice President of Branded Content at ADWEEK, and I am going to be your host for today's event. So before we begin, I just want to take a few minutes here, make sure everyone knows what to expect from our webinar today, and make sure that you're all familiar with the various features of our webinar platform. Our presentation today should go somewhere in the 30-minute range, give or take. Afterwards, we're going to have plenty of time for audience Q&A. So I want to invite everyone, if you have a question at any point during our presentation for our speakers, just simply use the question tool that you should see probably right now underneath the video window where you see me, and use that to submit your questions. Always like to have them all queued up for when we get to Q&A time, and so submit them when you have them, and we're going to get to as many as we can following our live presentation. It's not too late, by the way, to invite your colleagues to come and join us today. We'd love it if they would. We sent everyone a final reminder email for today's webinar about 15 minutes ago. In there, you're going to find a link over to the registration page. So grab that link, send it off to your colleagues. They've still got plenty of time to register. Come on in and join us live. But if they can't make it live, today's webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand, and we're going to send a link to that on-demand version to all of our registered users later this afternoon. So check your email, 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time. You'll have that link. Share that link with your colleagues if you think that they're going to enjoy some of this great content. If you would like a PDF of today's slides, we've made that available to you. You're going to find that in Event Resources. You should see that tab on your screen near where you see the question tool. So feel free at any point to go on in there and download a PDF of today's deck. Lastly, well, I just want to take a second and remind you to check out the ADWEEK webinar calendar, www.adweek.com/webinars. As I said, today is our first webinar of 2022, but we've got a whole bunch coming up. We're doing this is one of two this week, and we've got pretty much everything set up through January and into February on the webinar calendar, lots of different topics. This is always a great time to really catch up and get the year off on the right foot by making sure that you've got all the best practices that you need in place. So see what's coming up. Sign up for an upcoming webinar. You'll also get full access to our entire archive of on-demand webinars. All right, let's move on to today's webinar, and let me just quickly introduce our speakers today. Our guest speaker, Albert Thompson, if maybe you've joined us on a previous webinar he's been a part of. He's the Managing Director of Digital Innovation over at Walton Isaacson. Great webinar speaker, great communicator on everything. And really, Albert understands and is great at explaining how technology has continued to transform marketing while disrupting many of today's conventional consumer engagement models. He leads digital innovation over at Walton Isaacson, which is certainly one of the top multicultural agencies here in the U.S. From our sponsors today at Demandlocal, we'll be joined by Lachlan Maclean. Lachlan is the VP of Programmatic Operations over there. He's got 15 years of industry experience in product development, multi-platform fluency, innovative media planning, and again, he's very passionate about emerging ad tech and curating really sort of a versatile programmatic stack to meet the demands of forward-thinking clients. And so you'll hear from him on that. And you'll also hear from Erica Lindo. Erica is the Senior Director of Agency Partnerships over at Demandlocal, where she leads mobile marketing efforts for client partners such as Walton Isaacson. And again, she's all about developing high-profile agency partnerships by enhancing digital strategies, analyzing customer behavior, and maximizing profits via a digital presence. So with all that in mind, let me go off screen here and bring our panel up. Here we go. Welcome, everybody, and over to you, Albert, to begin our webinar today.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you, Stuart, for always being our sort of masters of ceremonies here and allowing us to host yet another webinar. So before we sort of get into the meat of the conversation, would love to just welcome my colleagues, Erica and Lachlan. So guys, welcome to our little fireside chat that we'll do via ADWEEK today.
Great to see you, Albert.
Hi.
Good. So look, I mean, I think I don't want to keep the audience waiting. I mean, a lot of what we're going to get into is sort of the power of location and really unlocking it, why it is such a driver around consumer thought, consumer behavior. We'll get into some sort of funny stories, some fun examples and stuff like that. But I think before we get into the crux of it, and, you know, Erica, you kind of take them through the run of show, perhaps you can kind of give the audience a quick blurb as to sort of why Demandlocal, because, you know, I have it from my perspective, why we started working together and why it's been a 7-year partnership. But I think as a quick value prop, people would just like to understand, even behind the namesake Demandlocal, like what the business is about, what it sort of represents, what it offers at its core.
Yeah, so Demandlocal was founded 15 years ago with the idea to apply emerging ad technology to automotive-specific challenges within the market space. Our founders had experience in this industry, and they wanted to use their expertise to adopt the latest developments and highlight strategies around hyper-local targeting. Now, in 2009, we were pushing agencies to break out search strategies that really provided 5-mile, 10-mile radiuses around dealerships. The reality is, demographically, the automotive space kind of presents a huge obstacle because the footprint goes beyond just dealerships, right?
Right.
So even though we knew the importance of having hyper-targeted ad groups to maximize exposure around surrounding like areas, we needed something a little bit more. And then 9 years ago, I would say the advent of mobile advertising presented a wealth of opportunity. We realized that we were able to look at location devices themselves, and that it would be a gateway to capturing tangible metrics like physical visitation. At the time, the automotive space lacked concrete conversion metrics beyond click-through rate and order forms, and we wanted to provide our clients with something that was never before seen that tied ROI directly into media spending. So we trademarked the term registered showroom visit and designed a solution that was able to refine and verify third-party data, reaching automotive audiences, tracking attribution, and providing insights for tier 2 and 3 agency clients. Now, since then, we've expanded and reached other verticals like CPG, healthcare. We've acquired a wealth of knowledge by working with you, Albert, in the multicultural space, and being able to refine audiences and verify and unverify, our efforts. Now, at today, Demandlocal, we run 10 different media channels, but continue to focus on innovation that enhances developments to give our clients data intelligence needed to understand consumer trends. Location data should not really just authenticate, media influence, but it should teach you something about your customers. I think you use the term being location aware, right? That's Albert.
Yep, absolutely.
And really knowing that how to engage and gather actionable insights from your customers. And mobile phone and tracking location is kind of the best way that we've been able to really do that.
That's great. Great. Well, I mean, look, when I looked at it, I was like, particularly for our automotive client, Lexus, the main thing that dealers care about is foot traffic. They want validation of people walking in. In their mind, that's sort of the lifeblood and health of the store. The more people walking in, then the better they feel that they will prove their closing numbers for the month. So I think the value prop for us was very straightforward when you look at what you guys delivered. So maybe what we could do really quickly is like take them through the run of show, what we'll cover, and let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts, kind of the conversation, the dialogue here.
Yes. All right, let me go into the slides. All right, so let's look at the agenda. We have the human truth about location. We're going to be looking at location as a cinematic storyline, why location matters post-pandemic, location data as the core to discovery, marketing's new data signals and structures, recognizing patterns and product cadence, and then visitation as attribution. And then we'll end with our key takeaways.
All right, sounds great. So let's kind of get into the human truth of location, because I always tell people, like, look, everyone's in the location business. They just, as I is noted here, they've yet to articulate it. So, you know, you got the infamous Snap Map for Snapchat. If you're trying to find your friends, and look, this is probably more prominent amongst Gen Z and millennials. You got Waze. I mean, look, we all Waze to our destination, but you're on road trips, and you got, you know, the visual on the right, Life 360, which is an app that allows you to track like the movements of, you know, let's say your kids. I have teenagers. You're not, you guys aren't quite there, but you're on the precipice of starting to look at, you know, how would I know where my son or daughter is at all times? So when you start to look at that, I mean, these are just sort of daily things we do. I mean, location is so much a part of how we make decisions now. It's almost like embedded. And that's why I stress the notion that, like, everyone's in the location business. You know, I think what we find is that there's not the application for basic, you know, sort of business principles. Like, we're not translating what we do personally to what we do work-wise. You know, Erica, we kind of joked about it. Like, what are some of the ways that, you know, like as a mom and as a working mom, like you're in the location business constantly as you sort of make decisions as you move beyond the domicile of your house?
Yeah, I mean, this morning I was like, okay, I got a big day. What am I going to do? I got to go pick up, I have to take my dog to the groomer so he's not barking in the background. I need to pick up breakfast because my son's here, homesick with COVID. So like, what patterns am I making? So I was literally driving, and this is all so that I can, you know, get here in time to start working and get my energy right. So I was thinking about, okay, needing to take my dog to the groomers. On the way back, I was going to order ahead, pick up some smoothies and lunch so that was taken care of for the kids. So I picked up tropical smoothie, and then I came home, handled that. So, I mean, and I think about that immediately when I wake up. Like, where am I going? What am I doing? What do I need to plan? Do I need to order shipped? Do I need to make sure my son has lunch since I'm going to be busy during lunchtime? You know, just these are just things that you have to start thinking about. Just when you wake up.
Absolutely. So one of the things we started to get into as well, you know, beyond the practical uses, is how location is played out on big screens, in particular movies. We got a couple examples here. Enemy of the State, I would call the Bourne trilogy, starting with the Bourne Identity. I mean, these were movies where the star was not so much the actors, Matt Damon, Will Smith, but was really the whole idea of location tracking, finding an operative or finding their movement, pattern matching and cross-referencing. I mean, so when you think about it in Lachlan, I know you can geek out on technology at the drop of a hat. You know, when you think about movie storylines where technology is the core, I mean, what we're talking about, artificial intelligence has been a storyline. The machine is taken over between Terminator and iRobot, you know, taken over. So the thing that location has been put on par with major technological advances, as basic as location is, I mean, it kind of validates that, like, it is a serious thing in terms of what it empowers and unlocks. So, you know, I don't know, you may have some perspective on looking at other things movie related that have been big technology themes. And then here we have location, as simplistic as it is, but it's a thing in movies and in TV shows as part of the narrative that builds the storyline.
Yeah, I mean, it just, like you said, it validates how central location and movement within the world is to the way that we live our lives today.
Yeah.
I was thinking, Albert, what is that show on Netflix that freaks everybody out that talked about kind of like where people were liking the influencers, and what was it called? I can't think about it.
There's a few. Some of them were like, there's a new one, Tag. There's I think one from Fade, you know, where, you know, people were, you know, engaging on social media, and then someone was actually tracking what their movements was and stalking them and killing them. And I think the biggest thing is that physical movement obviously isn't falsified with relation to your intent. You know, people can click on stuff but never buy. People can talk about it, be a word of mouth, or in the context of conversation, but it's not a thing. But when you think about behavior, it's very hard to falsify your intent or interest as part of your narrative. Like, I fake went to these locations, like I really like them, but I really hate them. That's just not like a thing in human behavior. So I think the lesson then, when you start looking at how it's played out from major cinema, it is the thing that, in Lachlan we'll get into, that kind of validates all the other information inputs that starts to help build profiles. And this is why we think it's so big when it pertains to looking at consumers.
Yeah, and people are saying Black Mirror, and we got Enemy of the State-Born trilogy. These are all really kind of draconian examples. But we have to, remember that location is doing all of this work on the back end to actually help us as well. So Hollywood doesn't always put the best look forward, but it does show how big of a factor that it is.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think the next thing we talked about was the, post-pandemic, like how a lot of the behaviors as consumers changed and why location matters post-pandemic. And, if you look at the visual here, it's like there's all these scenarios that are now playing out. One, when you go to retail, some places you have one option, now you have three, meaning you could go in store, some you go drive through, you could do curbside. Some places you can't even go in store. In particular, some of the Starbucks across the country, it's really a mixed bag between ones you can walk in and ones you can't. And it may be drive through essentially only. Now you have to manage, some places have closed or they have amended hours from what's posted. You have to think about what could be out of stock. So, Eric and I know you and I kind of discussed how some of your behaviors changed in moving to retail, given, look, that everyone's in a public health mindset related to even the variant still flying around related to it, and why it now matters, not only location related to product availability, but location data related to how you move to retail yourself.
Yeah, I mean, my retail patterns have changed tremendously. I like to kind of view myself as the ultimate retail consumer, just because I'm a mom. I'm, early mid 30s, household of 4. I have 2 kids, but really I'm the gatekeeper to everything that's really purchased in this house because I have say on what we do. And really, I just, I like to shop and buy and on all outlets. So, there's a difference between, going on an app and getting something delivered versus, me having any excuse to run to Target or Home Goods, because if that's the case, like I'm there, and not just to buy something, but really just to get out of my house and just walk around and get an instant gratification where like, yes, I need that book statue or I need this, pillow in my house. So I think really looking at the variations of, what drives these physical behaviors is important, but also what makes somebody drive and pick up at curbside or, drive through and pick up a smoothie instead of, walking in and getting a smoothie like I did this morning. And then what actually makes them want to walk into the store to shop, where then they will be more likely to purchase other things than just, what they might need at that moment.
Right, absolutely. I think the other thing we talked about was the redesign of path to purchase, meaning some people you started to hear this term phygital, the physical and digital. So some people would start in digital, buy in digital, start in digital, and then go buy in physical space because they need to touch it. And then some people, in a Best Buy model, they go into and trial it in the physical realm, touch it, go buy it online because it's cheaper. So you have these mixed pathways for which now people consume because of the COVID disruption and the configuration of which how stores are facilitating conversion, again, through drive-through, curbside, whether they now offer rapid delivery, but then obviously the modification of what's in stock, out of stock, what's not being carried, the store closure. So I think when we talked about planning, in particular for Lexus, almost the need to scrub everything pre-pandemic to then reassess patterns post-pandemic outbreak and say, this is the new normal. So a lot of our planning and thinking needs to be oriented around what is now being done, less of the historical reference of how things were.
Yeah. I mean, I look at that slide and it really makes me reflect on how far we've come. Like Erica said, 9 years, under a decade, from grabbing location data out of the bid stream essentially to now, teaching brands about the way to reach their consumers and interact in a, unprecedented event spanning multiple years, and really what we have to thank for that is the, increasing availability of, persistent, consistent location signals that are changing the story, like you said, Albert, from the initial use of location data, which was sort of a linear, here's your geofence, here's your targeting, here's your touches, to here's your measurement, to looking at that entire journey. How does different messaging influence when people shop, peak, off-peak hours, when, diving into the nuances of dwell time, which is coming about, which really teaches you about what people are doing at that physical location. You mentioned drive-throughs, you mentioned curbside pickup, behavior that's resembling in-store shopping. All of this stuff is on the table now and is changing everything aggressively.
Right. Absolutely. And that kind of leads into this notion of location data being a signal or indication of discovery or a tipping point. Because one of the things that I've always been floored with is a lot of money spent on advertising, but through the advertising vehicles, in particular digital, it's not validated whether the audience being reached, in particular in the physical retail context, actually has intent or the greatest tendency to visit the retail locations where you sell. Meaning if you're advertising a product and you're selling at a drugstore or a big box, or it doesn't matter if it's Sephora, you need to know that the impressions you're delivering against that audience actually has a greater tendency to visit the point of sale where the product's being sold. I think a lot of brands they don't even know. It's like, okay, you're reaching the audience through CTV, but do you know if that CTV audience you're targeting around those platforms, networks, channels, if that audience has interest in going to your main retail partner to buy it, because that's where you make 60% of your revenue? It's almost humorous. So it's like when you think about plenty of people browse or search and plenty of people talk, shop, let's call it user-generated content, word of mouth, social media, but they never buy. So the whole premise built behind the idea of the location data is obviously, and we'll talk about this, Lachlan, a little later, about the authentication, that this is actually an audience that will go to where we sell to make our money. It's not just about they're clicking on it, they're doing research, and they're talking about it. Like, you need that last match, but will they visit where you go? And obviously in the automotive realm, a dealership visit is very much a dedicated action, because no one just arbitrarily wants to go to a dealership and hang out for 3 hours.
I definitely don't. I hate buying cars.
So it's that notion we need to reach people that'll actually go to the dealership or, wherever that point of sale location is, with us still being a heavily focused physical retail world that we operate in, obviously particular for automotive. So I think that was the other thing we've always gotten into in terms of conversation as to why it matters when people ask, is because you only want to speak to people who will actually show up, because you're still not delivering 300,000 vehicles on flatbed trucks to your consumers every single day. That's one of the other things when we start to think about the next conversation is the updated data set structure. Now, if you look at the visual on the left, this is a competitive set, in particular for multicultural. And if you look at as in particular Black and Hispanic, as they get close to buying, within that 30, 60, 90 days, they consider more vehicles, 4 to 6, depending on the segment. That's massive. And, we've had conversations about, we really need to be certain we're reaching Lexus buyers with real intent for the brand, like real intent to visit. It'd be different if you were Tesla or you're selling via Carvana, where it's an online fulfillment model. But when you're still dealership contingent or retail footprint contingent, you need to be certain you're speaking to people who will actually show up. So, I'm going to hand this to Lachlan, but one of the things we talked about is we have all this notion of data signals and the structure, but it's really about putting location at the core of that. And, and Lachlan, this is kind of where we got into that conversation about what location provides the other inputs, that they're not 100% just absent that.
Yeah. Location aware is really it. It's kind of this notion of always on measurement that's taking advantage of something that's so central to, dealership processes and services and sales. I could compare it to a site pixel that's taking advantage of site traffic. We've got always on measurement. We've got all of these channels that are, driving traffic. We're seeing whether the needle is being moved on the ground there at the dealership. And then we're taking advantage of the visitation and that demonstrated intent to build location audiences from those visitors so that we can go find other people who match geo-behaviorally. And then We're also, looking at the home locations via Centroid so that we can identify areas of growth, residential areas of growth, and expand our targeting there and continue to mimic strategies that work. And so we've kind of built, and then the media follows that in turn. And so you've got this sort of, perpetual motion machine there with location at the center. Yeah,
I like that. I mean, one of the things you and I have talked about is the whole idea of lookalike modeling based on visitation patterns, not necessarily clickstream, not necessarily an auto intender, as I put in air quotes, but the idea of these are the people who visited. Let's find more people who are willing to visit, similar configuration, because at the end of the day, like I said, in certain businesses, it is sold at physical retail. So you don't make money until people essentially show up. I think that's a lost notion of the idea of lookalike modeling based on physical movement patterns. And that's very much what this is about in a similar fashion that people look at user session or clickstream and lookalike model off the same way.
Yeah, it's much easier when you have a digital conversion, like an order, because then the pixel can do that, and then the lookalike all exists in that web behavior space. But the challenge for automotive and the reason that location becomes so clutch is that we're turning that into a digital conversion that we can then chase.
Right.
And well, when it comes to multicultural and a luxury brand like Lexus, it becomes harder to identify who's actually on that site to purchase a vehicle. Like,
right.
Are they able to purchase that vehicle? So I know, a lot of OEMs have done studies on their site of comparing previous years versus 2020 to see, what are these new purchase indicators? What are people clicking on? What are they engaging with on the site? And, there's some that have found that, retail tools or finance tools, a lot of research aspects, which are great and it's good information, but that's that big data that doesn't necessarily give us, the behaviors that these people that might actually be able to purchase the Lexus. So I think being able to look at the full picture like you have with Lexus and taking all of these different components and insights, you've been able to really identify more head on, the behaviors of who would buy a Lexus, and then down to model specific and market specific as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think we always talked about that there are numerous things that a consumer never declares. It's in their head. But if you can get some of that back, if you can get to unlock it, you can understand that. So the idea of the store visitation gets you a greater degree of intimacy and understanding their willingness to do. And we'll get into some of the product cadence insights that were garnered before. But yeah, that's a huge piece of what it gives you with that. I did want to get back into Lachlan's one of his comments when he talked about understanding neighborhood and where there is growth. Look, a lot of the second tier markets are going through massive urbanization. So less of, when you think about an Atlanta that's become a sprawl, but you think about, new cities popping on the grid in terms of Austin, Denver. This, you start to understand you have to move your targeting related to how residential is moving. This was an example we discovered in the Baltimore market where, we're starting to run campaigns. And obviously, if you buy inventory for Baltimore, it just sort of democratizes in terms of how impressions are delivered. And Lachlan, before I continue, I'm going to let you give a bit of a blurb in terms of how inventory would just serve into a DMA and we'll get into how we had to make adjustments there.
Yeah, well, in adherence to time, we won't get too far into the workings of the DSP, but generally what it's going to do when it's not given a conversion value is it's going to chase abundance of inventory. It's going to deliver, it's going to adhere to your pacing schedule and try to meet your daily budget caps. And so you're going to get, like you said, you're going to get things that are concentrated in areas where there's high mobile device, a lot of mobile devices. And what we found and what we needed to do was be dynamic in the way that we were targeting, use polygon shaped geofences and radiuses, and really dynamically adapt where we were targeting to meet these residential areas of growth and opportunity, because that's the center of how people travel to a dealership. So I think it's sort of just a cautionary tale here to pay close attention, again, with location as the center of how you're delivering to those areas, because a lot of this delivery crossed lines of DMA or postal code or some of those other programmatic geo filters that you would find in the DSP themselves as well. And again, central to this effort as well was looking at the home locations of the converted visitors to see where they were actually living and traveling to each individual dealership, and then tailoring our targeting thusly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we know from look, most luxury buyer consumers, look, they live in a home with a 2-car garage. There's a driveway, very residential. If you look at the map on the left, a lot of the impressions were serving into downtown Baltimore, which is not where they live. We also know from the insight reporting you provide, the average store visitors is somewhere between 12 to 18 miles out from the dealership. So when you start to look at the red in contrast to the maps, there's a disconnect. The internet just wants to serve into downtown because everyone's clustering work with a mobile signal. But the reality is the map on the right says, yeah, but this is where they go to sleep at night, which has to do with where the car is parked and proximity to the dealership, less for buying, but more for servicing. Yes. And the Black consumer, when we think about, PG County, that Bowie area, that's the residential area. It's part of the reason the DMA has the highest affluent Black household income, but where we originally pocketing delivery is not where they live. It was just where people were. Yes. So a lot of the orientation had to be recalibrated. We did that in a series of cities. So that was a notion of really looking at the destination where, impressions were served against the location of where people live in correlation to where the dealerships are fixated in a market.
And we looked at maps, pull census map layers to confirm that our delivery was in the right places. And that's simply not going to happen if you just, assign, branded data elements, third-party auto intender elements with demographic layers, and then point it at, your DMA, for instance.
Right. I think the other thing we had discussions about was the creative conversation, what that unlocked, and in particular, what unlocked in terms of inventory vis-a-vis a consumer opportunity.
Right. Just being reactive. I mean, what we were doing, we had, I think at the time, those high impact interstitial and in-stream video units, and we were really interested in those because of the impact and telling the story and demographic specific creative from Lexus. But what we realized is it was kind of limiting our ability to reach some of those residential opportunity areas. And so we just adapted to a rich media unit that was a tap to expand to the video, et cetera, and then really unlocked those inventory areas. So yeah, again, that's just principle of the not set, just set it and prescribe a plan, but actually look where you're delivering and then look at the avails, opportunities and areas where you need to be delivering, and then adapt, creative and targeting strategies.
Right. So look, I mean, I think the last thing to kind of bring this home was really talk about the impact on product cadence. I mean, when we track store visits, we just don't look at holistically for the brand. We look at the model level, because if you see visitation patterns are stronger related to one vehicle versus another, that means the demand and interest growing could be there as well. When you start to think about it, you have to start thinking, well, do we need different supply? We have more foot traffic correlating to one vehicle versus another vehicle that we have more inventory of. But the consumer could be telling that, hey, we are more willing to deal with you. And this applies if you were talking about packaged goods, going to a drugstore or some other big box. We're more willing to visit if this is what you're putting in front of me. So we've started to use that information to say, hey, we see strong visitor correlation related to this vehicle versus that one. This is probably going to be the future, or you need to increase the supply of this one versus that one, because the consumer is telling you, I have a greater propensity and tendency to show up if this is what you're marketing to me versus this one over here, or that there's a new consumer that is facing us for which there's a greater interest in this vehicle than in this vehicle as well. So I think one of the other things we discovered is that the product cadence insight becomes key if you're really monitoring willingness to move to retail. And it's no different than swapping with a different promotional offer. This one got more clicks than that one and more conversions. But we looked at it the same way. Well, this one's driving more visitation. So this one is probably now going to drive more sales opportunity. And we use store visitor insight to validate the dealers. You need to get more wear in with this vehicle because they're coming to see you because we put this in front of them.
Yeah, and I think this can go beyond automotive too. I know we kind of talked about other industries though where this could be applied, and like CPG, local, like for me, just for CVS right now. I've been looking for recent advertisements that have to do with medicines. I go to Target offers, kind of finding things where I can go locally and quick, where I can pick something up. So, I mean, it can work with a variety of different industries, whether it comes to product cadence.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, before we move into and let you sort of close this out, Erica, I think the whole idea that we're trying to say is visitation has a place in the attribution model, and perhaps need to be moved up in its currency, because the idea is, you can see, what we've sort of batted back and forth is, it can teach you about the consumer you're pursuing, and media should do that more than just, deliver impressions. And I've said that to you guys since the day we started working. Like, we have to be constantly actively learning, because clients constantly ask questions. And an executive meeting conversation isn't about media math, the great CPC and all that. It's like, what does the interest look around the product on the ground? And do we need to make production changes? Do we need to make inventory changes? I mean, that's the dialogue. Look, the same thing happens at physical retail. What's moving off the shelf? What is pulling people in? We need more of that to sustain, operations and margins and things of that nature. So I think the way we looked at it is that location will carry a much bigger role in the future. It doesn't matter if you're talking SMS, which is going to be huge, app development, from the notion of live content to even the metaverse, that, there'll be a layer of location intelligence very omnipresent in those worlds as they develop further and further. So Erica, why don't you sort of bring it home as we've sort of capped off all the things we've gone to, and then we'll open up to Q&A.
Yeah. So hopefully from this, you were able to take away utilizing foot traffic patterns to understand consumer journeys, how brands could use foot traffic measurement to enhance their marketing strategy, supply chain management decision making, and business model planning, and then how to use foot traffic beyond simply reporting visitation to be in line with business intelligence. Kind of going back as far as, some of the discovery that we were able to capture through Lexis, and then looking at product cadence, and then looking at attribution beyond just tracking media spend versus, who's walking in, right? It's learning something about that consumer and kind of finding out more about their behavior. So, yeah.
The other thing we talk about is look, we know that in certain businesses, their lower funnel outcomes between conversions, obviously in automotive, there's sales match. I think we've always looked at it as a leading indicator of what to come. If store visit traffic was healthy, we expect to see a bump. If it was weak, maybe not so much. I think during COVID, if they're not walking in, where did their journey go? Did it go to an all digital journey, which in a lot of facets for a lot of industries it respectively did. So it's less of even sort of the all end all, because I think that brands should be actively tracking business outcomes, sales, margins, etc. It's the notion that it can be the beginning of the telling story of what could be to come.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we finished it up. We'll open up Q&A. We'll bring Stuart back, who would join us and help sort of moderate and facilitate what questions the audience may have. Thank you, Stuart.
And I am back. Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Lachlan. Great conversation. I mean, we talk a lot about phygital, right? I mean, that is one of our 2022 buzzwords. I think as we look at this, it's really good to see it sort of in action and how it's being used, and what it actually says. I think some really interesting slides there that I'm sure people want to sort of go in a little bit deep. Listen, we're going to take some audience questions in just a second. We've got a whole bunch of them that have come in during the event, but I want to just remind our audience and invite you all, if you do have a question for our speakers, just simply use the question tool you see on your screen. I'm going to get to as many as we can over the next 10 minutes or so. So please submit your questions. I just also want to let you know, if we don't have a chance to get to your question, we always forward all the questions over to our sponsors. So there's always the opportunity for an offline response. A couple quick reminders before we get to that. First off, our webinar today has been recorded. You're going to get a link to that recording. Oh, and the thank you email you get probably about 3:30, 4 o'clock Eastern time today. Feel free to share that link with your colleagues. If you think that they're going to benefit from this and you want them to see this, share the link. Better yet, have them register. We'll send them that link directly once it's available. Secondly, if you want a PDF of today's slides, we've got those available for you, and you're going to find it in event resources. So head on in there at any point during, and download the PDF of the slides. Always makes a nice takeaway. Good to be able to, again, go in a little bit deeper afterwards, as there are sometimes some details in some of those maps and things like that that maybe you didn't have a chance to see as you were paying attention to the conversation. So let me take the slides down as we go into Q&A here, and let's just sort of jump into some of these questions that have been coming in fast and furious. Number one, I mean, look, we're talking about location data. We also know right now for so many brands, they are really moving into a customer data platform level execution. And so my question, and Albert, I'm watching you nod, but I'm going to guess, Lachlan, you probably have some thoughts in here as well. Where does location begin to really fit in the information in that CDP as you are really starting to manage your first party data, really have an understanding of some of that? So Albert, you want to kick that one off?
Sure, yeah, and I definitely open up to the team to respond. I think when you start to look at it, there are things that validate the first party data as a continued behavior. So if you're looking at retention or lookalike, you're looking for people who sort of match and do similar things. And look, you could look at it between, for automotive, residentially, where people live, what are their points of interest, and are they similar? And obviously, yes, they have to be willing to move to the store location where the car is bought and will be serviced as the sort of ultimate match. I think when you start to look at the differences in generations between boomers, Gen Xers, your future consumers of millennials, and ultimately Gen Z at some point, will they have the same physical movement patterns? Meaning that could be a generation like, look, I want it delivered. I like the brand, I want the product, but I don't want to come in and sit for 3 hours. I want to fill out the paperwork online, and I want the car loaded on a truck, and I'll wait for it. I don't have to come get it today and walk out. Those are the things that essentially start to get worked into future consumers. Are their behaviors the same as the core ones you had? And from a retention standpoint, are people willing to repetitively take the same physical actions, or have they modified their behavior? Meaning, I've been buying this brand for years. I don't need to go see it anymore. Just ship it to me. And that essentially changes. So I think you start to look at location validating the lookalike modeling, similar to what Lachlan talked about, as well as your future consumer. Is there pattern matching? And if there's not, can you still get the same outcome that they will still buy the same stuff you sell, but the procurement channel, the path to purchase is just modified and different.
Got it. Lachlan, anything you wanted to add on that one? I know you talked about opening this up to the panel here.
No, I think that covers that one.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on. And Erica, let me just go to you in this direction. Right? We talked about location data and attribution. Why has location data not really moved up as people are building out their attribution models? Why is this not a key area? Or what have you heard as they're setting up their attribution priorities?
I read something the other day that said people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions to destroy it. And the reality is the ad space and marketers tend to feel or try to create an illusion that we can learn about the consumers by our fingertips, right? There's a lot of new data enhancements that have come into, the picture in the past, I would say 2 years, that try to analyze site behaviors. A lot of people, look to Google Analytics as the main, it's like the Bible when it comes to understanding their audience. And then, you have those on-site purchase indicators also that a lot of companies are trying to measure and look at through pixels and all that. But the reality is there's still a humanistic characteristic that needs to be considered when it comes to retail. And a lot of these new developments can't really do that. It has to be done by tracking their location. There's only so much you can learn by looking at finance or inventory tools, say in regards to Lexus, that kind of give you touch points about how the dealer no longer is looking at contact indicate details or looking at directions, which is what used to be purchase indicators for sites back in the day. Really, that's all that's just telling us, is that people don't want to be contacted, and they don't want to, they just want to research information about buying a new car and do it themselves. So it's not really giving us information about the consumers, where location really could do that. I mean, am I right, Albert?
I think, the first question an investigator is going to ask you, Stuart, is, where were you last night? It's accountability.
I'm not going to answer where I was last night. I was going to say I went all the way to my living room and then back again. But what I guess I was also thinking is, when we talk about location, right? I mean, so much of location has been built around a lot of assumptions, right? The classic, right? You want the coffee drive-through to be on the side of the street, that people are in the direction people are going for their morning commute, and you want the dinner to go on the one on their way home. However, if people aren't commuting and showing those same patterns, and the way traffic is shifting, and the way that the convenience factors have entirely changed, right? Erica, you're not going to go pick up your smoothies in the morning based on your commute. Your patterns have changed. So my question out of all this, patterns are changing very significantly. I think, Albert, you said this, right? That we need to sort of that during the pandemic, we've really had to reassess how we're viewing traffic patterns. How often do people need to start to reassess their traffic? Is this something where we should be thinking in terms of real time, right? We know that part of digital is this idea of constant agility, right? What you might have bought in store, now you're buying for, you're going to sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes waiting for someone to bring it to you, or maybe you will go into the store. I mean, it changes on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. Do you need, for location, using location data as part of identifying intent, is this where you need to look at those location patterns on a constantly evolving basis? I guess is my question.
I think it's a dynamic conversation. If you're thinking about product availability, because everybody talks about all the product backed up in Long Beach ports sitting on container ships, that's in real time, because that dictates where you will move to acquire it. So I think you have to be aware. And look, clients need to be running campaigns that are location aware of their product availability or lack thereof, and move impressions over to not send people to locations where it doesn't exist and it's not available, because that's irritating consumer. Like, time is our most valuable asset. We hate that. So in that context, we run campaigns that dynamically could tap into inventory, even beyond automotive, to say that product's not there. We turn off the impressions to serve around that zip code area, that location, and start to serve in areas where it is available. That's massive now, just in terms of what we're going through with all the supply chain backups. I think in terms of consumer behavior, it's not as real time. It's probably more once a quarter at least. Now, if we go into a lockdown like we did during COVID, where media got turned off and things shifted to areas that weren't as wasteful, then that has to be fluid. I think during COVID, we all learned that. But I think from our assertion, when we work with Demandlocal, definitely annually, I think the patterns we start to look at a comparison of quarter to quarter, because there is a cyclical nature in most categories that you can't ink behavior based on 30 days. It's not enough, unless you're talking about a launch or a product drop that just came out. It's very, very different. But if you're looking at some brand with some level of continuity, we look at that interval to look at, what does the store visitation look like in around key sales events? Lexus has 3 for the year. What is it quarter to quarter? I mean, and look, sometimes the brands have seasons you need to be aware of to look at the correlation of foot traffic related to their calendar. I think that's a huge piece you have to take into account in terms of how real time you need to be with looking at location. But right now, you need to be looking at it from multiple facets. Definitely product and consumer angles, but there might be others depending on the business model you're operating.
Got it. I think we've got time for one more question. Lachlan, let me direct this in your direction, because it is the one we've probably gotten this question about 5 different ways. And can we talk a little bit about Look, obviously for every marketer, the issue of privacy is important, and data privacy. We know just all the changes going on, and in the cookieless future, which is the cookieless present, and issues obviously related to mobile and IDFA and iOS. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the impact of privacy and where some of the things that we're discussing today, how that ultimately relates?
Sure. Apologies. I was trying to type some answers as well to everybody. I appreciate the questions. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a presentation of its own. I'm seeing some of the privacy and cookieless and related questions, and that could be, its own presentation. And a lot of that stuff is very speculative. But I think as a blanket answer, we look at, things like the opt-in instead of opt-out type patterns and the increases in user privacy as a positive thing, not a negative thing. It's kind of filtering out app data and location data that from apps that don't provide that reciprocal value to the user. And so while it might be narrowing the scope of available information and data, it's narrowing it in a more authentic fashion. I think with regards to the iOS change also, it's easy to be iOS centric because they've got 60% of the market share, et cetera, and obviously the media loves to talk about it. But when we looked at the actual numbers for our own location data, even prior to 14.5, we saw that 2/3 of the location data was already informed by the Android IDs. We consistently see Android global bid requests outnumbering iOS bid requests. So, they already were a huge player in the location story. And, that was something that I don't think a lot of folks anticipated. So it didn't make as large a waves. And I think it's important not to put the cart in front of the horse as far as being concerned about what's going to happen or potentially happen. We have to remember how much value and incentive there is in being able to translate app data, location data to marketers for the sake of keeping these apps alive, et cetera. So it's kind of a wait and see type answer, but we're being optimistic, and we're also very much in favor of user privacy and kind of filtering those unscrupulous players in the space.
Right. So those, as you're saying, those apps that are guarding privacy, that may, use some location data as part of this, but are transparent in their use and are diligent in their privacy, those are ultimately the ones that you want the data from, because those are the ones that are ultimately the most reliable out of all of this.
Precisely. And we're counting on the fact that there will still be a method for transfer of information between consenting parties. I think that we're just shifting from kind of the Wild West to something a little bit more civilized.
Yeah, sounds good. Listen, as much as I'd love to continue this conversation, we are running out of time. So I just want to thank the three of you. Really, again, great presentation, great conversation. Thank you for taking some time to answer audience questions. To our audience, if you did not get your question answered, again, I'm forwarding it over to our sponsors so you can look potentially for an offline response. Final quick reminders here. Again, you're going to get that link to the on-demand version. Share that away. You want the slides, you're going to find them right now in event resources. Lastly, adweek.com/webinars, our webinar calendar. You're going to see that when you exit out of this and see what's coming up and sign up for an upcoming webinar. Lots of them out there. Check out the archive of on-demand webinars as well. Maybe we'll put together a list of the Albert Thompson greatest hits
Right.
as we've done on this as we go on. But again, thank you, Demandlocal, to our sponsors of Demandlocal. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to our audience for taking time out of your busy day. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming ADWEEK webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stuart. You're great. Thank you, audience. Appreciate it.
Yes.